Technology adoption is pivotal on improving the efficiency and effectiveness in revenue mobilization. No doubt, the traditional kinds of paper forms always will be an essential part of the tax administration system. Automation of revenue collection systems and structures is instrumental in improving and simplifying administration of taxation through utilizing modern technologies. The Federal Inland Revenue Service, FRS, on the 30th of March 2020, announced its intention to commence the deployment of its automated tax administration system, ATAS, that will give access for tax purposes, relevant data, information records, etc. The ATAS will be held in systems as electronic devices or cloud computing facilities, including points of sales or invoicing platforms maintained, owned, or controlled by taxpayers or their agents. With this development in place, experts say digitalization of tax collection and tax administration is critical to ensure greater transparency of the tax system, a widening of the tax base while mitigating compliance risk and encourage voluntary tax compliance. Well, to give more insight, I introduced him earlier. He's the senior manager, Anderson Nigeria, Mr. Temitope Kolade. Mr. Kolade, thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to all.
It's really great to have you on the show.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
First, reading through that automation, almost all facets of life now, we have to include technology. That's the way to go. We all agree with that. Technology and taxation. Take us through what this automation will do. What is it going to change in our tax system? Let's understand it.
Okay, thank you, Tolokwe. I think I'll start from the fact that, back in history when we used to have tax collectors moving from house to house, they used those crude methods that made them very unlikable to the common people on the streets. And of course, we have then grown over time from that, such that we now have a taxation system that sometimes you don't even recognize who is collecting the tax in terms of the individuals behind the scenes.
True.
And what that does is that it builds trust in the system. It builds some level of transparency. Why? Because we are able to monitor the numbers over time to see, oh, this is what is happening. And of course, it also takes people out of the picture. For instance, you know that when people are involved, when there is human interface, there is the likelihood that there will be some games happening behind the scenes, sharp practices. So we're able to deal with that when you automate. It means that from registration to tax payments to tax returns filing, we can have them automated, and we can possibly even deploy independent parties to confirm what is happening, whether the taxes are being paid rightly, whether it's being fully paid. And the question really is, who audits the tax auditor, right? Who checks what the tax auditor says he has collected? So the tax collector goes from here to there, and then he says, oh, I've collected so much from company ABC. Who checks whether the amount is correct? But with automation, we're able to see the trail of events and transactions, and we're able to confirm whether things have been done rightly.
I always worry when we talk so very much about automation, how beautiful it looks, because I like my job to be automated too. I like my graphics and everything being, but jobs. Are people not going to lose jobs, or are we going to create new jobs? I need to understand that aspect too.
All right. So what we found, and what people who are at the forefront of digitization have told us, is that digitalization is going to provide more jobs in reality. So you're going to have that people need to upskill themselves. That's the only difference. Now we see that, of course, when you say we have ATMs, that's the automated teller machines, for instance. It doesn't mean that there are no people working in the banks anymore. People continue to work, and people continue to ensure that those systems work.
True.
And we then begin to even have people who are specialized in data science, and they're able to even analyze the data behind the scenes. So it's not essentially going to take jobs from people. What I believe would happen is that people would have revised roles. For instance, you want the system to be able to compute taxes. Yeah. Taxes will not be computed based on mathematics. They are computed based on laws. Sure. That means you need people who understand the law to even interpret before the software developer who is able to code then says, okay, this is what is going to happen here. We have 5% of this amount. And sometimes, for instance, let me share this example to say, okay, we have an amount. I've bought, say, some items at the supermarket, and then some of those items that are bought at the supermarket may not necessarily be taxable, for instance, if they are basic food items. Some of them will be vatable. And because of that, I need someone who is able to program the system such that when they are computing, they are able to know what we are applying the 7.5% of VAT on, and not essentially on every item that I bought. So that's part of the automation. And essentially, you need people to even check that. And because the system is also what we call GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. What you feed into the system is what it gives you. It's not able to think for itself in that sense. So we need to monitor whether the output is even in line with what we have sent in, and then we need to check whether there is no compromise at any point, because people are still involved in the system. So it doesn't take the job from people, it just needs people to be on top of their jobs and do better.
Okay, so when people hear that now, they know their jobs are safe. But moving on, that's on a lighter note. What about cost of collection? Okay, before now, we're talking about the old methods and all of that. Will this in any way help reduce costs and also help shore up revenue on the other side? Because I know definitely we need to shore up revenue now when it has to do with taxation. I was talking earlier with regards to debt, and you know what we grapple with. Yeah. So what are the positives? Let's now talk about the positives in automation for tax. Okay,
talking about the positives in automation, of course, is going to help us reduce the cost of collection, because at the moment you ask yourself how many people pay tax in Nigeria. About just 65 million out of the 200 million have the economic power in the first place that even earn. And not all of that, just about 30% of that actually pay tax. And then when you narrow it down that way, you find that in the long run, we're talking for about 10 years now, tax to GDP ratio just hovering around 6%. It doesn't get better. Why? Because we are struggling to collect from the same persons, from the same company. Unlike what you see in some advanced countries like America, you find that individuals actually pay more of the taxes. In Nigeria, you see that about 50% of the tax collection is from companies. And that's not good for us. And you even find, if you delve in very well, that the government that collects, that should collect tax on behalf of its employees, the civil servants, in most cases don't remit the tax. So that's also part of the problem that we have. So we don't have people remitting. And one of the reasons why that is because it's not automated. If things are automated to the extent that you have deduction at source, you have systems that compute it, it should be easy for states and the federal government to even have some reconciliation to say, okay, how much of this tax have been paid by the employees of the state, how much of the tax have been. So, and then we reduce how many people have to crunch the numbers, because the machine does it faster, right? So it reduces the cost of employing everybody. Over time, we see that the cost goes down in terms of the work to be done.
You talked about the United States, where people would always want to pay tax. I always give this example, being very factual. I'm a journalist, I'm not a politician. Lagos is a state that I use an example. Go to the island, go everywhere, you see infrastructure being built. So I think for Lagosians, they'll be happy to pay tax, at least to a level, higher percentage than maybe some states. The issue of trust comes in now. Trust. How well do you see us as taxpayers trusting our tax administrators and, managers of our funds? Yeah. Because that trust thing is important. How do we build that trust?
How do we build trust? There are actually three things that we need to look at when we think about tax collection. One is enforcement, the other is facilitation, the other one is the trust. And reports have even found that trust has become the biggest of all. In fact, it takes about 70% of the share, because you tell people to enforce, even the people that you deploy to do the enforcement may be compromised.
Exactly.
You say you want to facilitate it, you want to tell people how to do it. Tax is not something anyone really wants to pay, but it's certain you got to pay it. But then you find that in a system where people don't also have trust in the system, then it becomes a problem, because the trust quotient is really low in our country, and then because of that, it affects virtually every facet of the government, right? It affects virtually every sector of what we do.
Yeah.
So it's really important to build trust, and the way to build trust is really to be transparent. What do we use this money to do? For instance, in Brazil, some research were done by the World Bank, and then they found that participatory budgeting helped to increase tax collection. So you get people to understand that actually the revenue that we're talking about, just like Professor Ken Ife was talking about, that we're talking about revenue, and if you don't have enough revenue to pay back the debt, then there is a problem. And of course, this revenue comes from tax. Oil is no longer sustainable. At least COVID-19 has shown us that. So it's then very important that we begin to build trust in people, that of course we use this to fund the budget. And this is what we do at the beginning of the budgetary cycle. This is what we are planning to do. At the end, do we come back to say this is what we have done? Do people ask questions? And those are some of the things that we need to do to begin to build some level of equity, fairness to the system, and people see the transparency of government and then the willingness to turn things around.
But at this time where government really needs funding, I don't think they have a choice than to build this kind of trust, so they can get more. If I'm not a fan of expanding the tax net, I'm not conversing for that, because I know Nigerians. But you know, at the time we talked about informal and also formal sector, all of it coming together, and we properly collect what is supposed to be collected. So do you think this can help, number one, increase that figure that we talked about, our tax to GDP ratio, which has always been 6%, and also shore up revenue?
Yeah, definitely we can shore up revenue, and you've used a very good example. We look at Lagos State, and because virtually everyone sees what's happening in Lagos State, people don't necessarily fight their employers when they deduct their pay and the remit, and then they collect their tax clearance certificates also, and see that these funds have been paid to the government. So it makes it a lot easier. Unfortunately, you find that about, in terms of personal income tax compliance in Nigeria, Lagos takes about 46%. And so not so much is happening in other states. So I think it's interlinked, and you begin to think about what's even the earning power of the people. Right? If they don't have the earning power, where do they pay the tax from? So we need to, of course, if we take it back to all of the things that we need to do, the infrastructural gap, are we able to empower people to even earn in the first place? If they earn, then maybe they would pay tax. Because currently you see with the Finance Act 2020, they're saying if you earn less than 30,000 in a month, you are exempted from paying tax. So does it help to collect any tax?
No.
Right, because people shouldn't really be earning that low, but there are people who don't even earn at all, because they are basically dependent on others. Sometimes you find that one person works for 10 people in a family. So these are some of our problems. If we have people earning more, probably they will be able to pay more as well. But again, we should not take out the fact that there are some people who are earning and find every means not to pay. And of course, enforcement would also do some work there. But trust, very important, because if we make it transparent, I think that we'll be able to we'll be able to show up the revenue to find that really people are coming in to voluntarily remedy their taxes, because they can see. And of course, we need to also connect it to other social amenities. What do people get? For instance, it doesn't really matter how much I pay in tax. I apply the same road, I go into the same potholes and all of that. But maybe when I need to build a house, for instance, where is my tax clearance certificate? Maybe that would help me, for instance. If I need to get an approval from the government for something, you tie it to my tax clearance certificate. Maybe it would help people to begin to take tax seriously. And then, of course, we can educate them at every point where they push back to say that really we're using the tax to do something for everybody.
Very interesting conversation. Technology, very interesting when we talk about technology. Whichever way you want to look at it, that is the way to go. But don't forget, we also have challenges, infrastructure. Because when we talk about, it comes into the system, we do the calculations, we do all of this. What do you think about challenges of infrastructure and those that might still want to get engaged or involved in sharp practices, still trying to go into the system and see what can be done to sabotage the system.
Okay, you remember I talked about who is taxing the tax auditor earlier?
You did.
Right. So the question is, if we have the system, right, the system creates a trail.
Good.
And
from
so
the start.
Yeah, from the beginning, and then we can monitor the process. And at some point, we can begin to ask, who checks what the Federal Inland Revenue Service says it has collected at the end of the year? Can we get external parties to do a check? Can we get a consortium? The same way we'll get people to, say, audit the NNPC, for instance, and they give us the results and they publish the accounts. Can we get people to audit trail, to do maybe some forensic studies on the collection year on year, to say, okay, how much should this company have paid? Did they pay that much, or did they pay less because somebody earned something that shouldn't have been earned? So these are some of the things that we can build into the system to say, okay, now we know that there is a system that is open to any other person in the society that will want to have access to that system, and then we can invite experts to look into it and say, okay, is it exactly the way it's been said it is?
Now, finally, you guys, I know a lot has been happening. COVID-19 has held practitioners like you down. What's new? What are you advising your clients? What are you telling us? How do we invest? What do we look at? No, but for real, we should talk about that, because I think we're getting back to normal one way or the other. We'll still have to take the vaccines and won't lose guard, keep washing our hands. But at least one way or the other, work must go on. Yeah. So how has it been practicing and all of that after COVID?
Yeah, I think that practice has been ongoing even during COVID.
Yeah, of course.
And that's the truth, because we're working from home, and then because our work is not physical, right? You're still able to do a lot of virtual, and which is
technology again.
Yeah, technology again. So it's important that the government really moves to this automation of tax collection. And what we're advising our clients to do is that it's pays to actually comply than to get some enforcement action from the government, right? Because I mean, in the long run, we are all in the system, and the only way to make the system better is that you pay your own fair share of tax. And of course, the fair share, don't pay more than is necessary, don't pay less than what you should pay. Yeah. So that's basically what we're telling our clients, and the way to go about that is to follow what the law says. Again, depending on which side you are, you really want to interpret the law, and that's why lawyers are in business anyways. And some of us are lawyers, so you then say, oh, which part of the law favors you as a taxpayer? Which one favors the government? The government wants to focus on what favors them the most, and then we're looking at it. Are there some loopholes? Are there ways that the laws have been worded, and you can capitalize on that, for instance, and ensure that your clients, our clients, don't pay more than what is necessary. That's what we're telling our client. Don't pay more than what is necessary. Pay what is right, and let the government run.
Mr. Temitope Kolade, a senior manager, Anderson, thank you very much for spending your afternoon with us. I really appreciate it, and it's good to see you.
Thank you too.
All right,
My pleasure.